I still remember the exact moment my life shattered and rebuilt itself into something stronger. "I can't do this anymore, Emma," he said, packing his bags while I sat there, still weak from my second round of chemotherapy. "This isn't what I signed up for. 12 years of marriage, disposed of like yesterday's trash." 3 months later, I watched James from across the charity gala, his new girlfriend hanging on his arm while I stood on stage accepting the Entrepreneur of the Year award. The shock on his face when my name was announced made every painful moment of recovery worth it. The tumor had been discovered during a routine checkup. Concerning, my doctor had called it, her face careful and measured. Stage 2 breast cancer. Treatable, but requiring immediate and aggressive intervention. I'd called James immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "I'll be right there," he'd promised. And he was, for the first 2 treatments. Then the excuses began. Work emergencies, important meetings. Eventually, he stopped pretending altogether. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I knew something was terribly wrong that Thursday evening. When I arrived home from treatment, the house felt different, emptier somehow, despite all the furniture remaining in place. In our 12 years together, I'd learned to read the rhythms of our home, the particular silence that greeted me that day speaking volumes before I even saw the half-empty closet. "James?" I called out, my voice echoing through our suburban, Columbus home. The house we'd chosen together because of its proximity to good schools, thinking we'd fill the 3 bedrooms with children, dreams put on hold for his career, then mine, and now permanently altered by my diagnosis. I found him in our bedroom, methodically folding designer shirts into an expensive leather suitcase, the anniversary gift I'd given him just 6 months earlier. My heart plummeted to my stomach as I leaned against the doorframe, suddenly needing its support more than I had needed the nurse's arm after chemotherapy. "What are you doing?" I asked, though the answer was painfully obvious. James didn't immediately look up, his movements deliberate and rehearsed as though he'd planned this moment carefully. At 41, he still had the same handsome features that had attracted me 12 years ago when we'd met at a pharmaceutical conference, me representing medical research, him in marketing. His dark hair had touches of distinguished silver now, and the laugh lines around his eyes had deepened, though I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen him truly laugh. "I think we both know this isn't working anymore," he finally said, his voice eerily controlled. "What isn't working?" I stepped into the room despite my exhaustion, despite the nausea that still lingered from treatment. "Our marriage? Our life? Or is it just that I got sick, James?" He sighed, that familiar sound of exasperation I'd grown increasingly accustomed to over the past few weeks. "Don't make this about your illness, Emma. We've been drifting apart for years. You must have noticed." "Drifting apart," I repeated, his words tasting their bitterness. "That's what you call it when your wife gets cancer and suddenly you're unavailable? When I'm fighting for my life and you can't be bothered to drive me to treatments?" "It's not that simple." He finally looked at me, his expression a carefully constructed mask of regret that didn't quite reach his eyes. "This diagnosis, it's forced me to reevaluate everything. Life is short, Emma. Too short to stay in a relationship that isn't fulfilling." The words struck like physical blows. Unfulfilling. As though my illness was an inconvenience to his happiness, rather. Then a threat to my existence. "Is there someone else?" The question escaped before I could stop it. The slight flinch, the momentary tightening of his jaw gave me my answer before he spoke. "That's not the point," he said, returning to his packing with renewed focus. "It is absolutely the point," I countered, anger beginning to replace shock. "At least have the decency to be honest with me. After 12 years, I deserve that much." James paused, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. Fine. Yes, there is someone else. Though I had suspected, had seen the signs of late night, texts and unexplained absences, hearing the confirmation felt like having ice water poured down my spine. Who? I demanded, though part of me already knew. Natalie, he said, and the name landed like a slap. Natalie Pierce, his 29-year-old marketing assistant. I'd met her at company functions, had watched her laugh at James's jokes, had noticed how her hand lingered on his arm just a fraction too long. I'd dismissed my concerns, trusting our 12 years together meant more than fleeting attention from someone new. Your assistant, I said flatly. How original. His expression hardened. Marketing coordinator, and it's not like that. She understands me, Emma. She supports my goals, my vision. We connect on a level that you and I haven't in years. Because she worships the ground you walk on? Because she's young enough to be impressed by your stories? Because she hasn't seen you fail? The bitterness spilled out, unstoppable now. Because she challenges me, he shot back. Because she has her own dreams, her own ambitions. She's not content just riding on her initial success, then coasting through life. The accusation stung with particular cruelty. 5 years ago, I'd left my research position to start my own medical communications consultancy. The first 2 years had been spectacular. Rapid growth, prestigious clients, industry recognition. The past 3 had been more stable, more focused on maintaining client relationships rather than aggressive expansion. James had called it lacking ambition when I'd chosen work-life balance over constant growth. Coasting, I repeated, the word hollow in my mouth. Is that what you think I've been doing? Building a stable business so I could eventually start the family we always talked about? He zipped the suitcase closed with a finality that echoed in my chest. I'm not going to debate this, Emma. My mind is made up. Of course it is, I said. Always so decisive when it's about what you want. He lifted the suitcase from this bed, finally meeting my eyes directly. What surprised me wasn't the lack of love, that had been fading for months, but the complete absence of guilt. He wasn't just leaving, he was relieved to be going. For what it's worth, he said, pausing. At the bedroom door, I did love you once, very much. Once, I echoed. Lucky me. As he moved past me, the familiar scent of his cologne lingered, triggering a cascade of memories. James celebrating my first major client acquisition, champagne glasses raised in our tiny first apartment. One day, he'd promised, eyes bright. With shared dreams, we'll own that beautiful Victorian on Lakeview Drive, the big one with the wraparound porch and the guest house. And it'll be because we built something amazing together. We, us, together. Words that no longer applied. The house on Lakeview Drive, I said suddenly, stopping him in the hallway. Is that still your dream? The one you talk about at dinner parties to impress people? He studied me, confusion momentarily replacing his certainty. Why does that matter now? Just answer the question, James. Is that still the dream house? Yes, actually. It's going up for auction next month. The owners are divorcing, selling everything. He hesitated, seemed about to say something more, then thought better of it. Without another word, he continued down the hallway. Moments later, the front door closed with a soft click, and just like that, 12 years ended. No dramatic showdown. No tearful pleas. Just the quiet departure of a man who had decided I was no longer worth the investment. I stood frozen in our bedroom, my bedroom now, surrounded by the evidence of his calculated exit. The half-empty closet, vacant dresser drawers, the indentation on his side of the mattress already beginning to fade. I didn't cry. Not then. Something else was taking shape inside me. Something I hadn't felt in years. As the silence of the house pressed in around me, I made myself a promise. This wouldn't be the end of my story. It would be the beginning. The next morning, I woke to the harsh beeping of my alarm clock, the same sound that had started every day of my married life. For a moment, I reached across to his side of the bed, my body operating on 12 years of muscle memory. The cold, emptiness that met my fingertips jolted me back to reality. This was my life now. This quiet house. This half-empty bed. This body fighting itself while my husband moved on with someone new. I forced myself through the motions of my morning routine, careful to take my post-chemo medications with the bland toast my sensitive stomach could tolerate. As I sat at our kitchen island, imported marble that James had insisted upon during our last renovation, I scrolled through old photos on my phone. Pictures from happier times, our honeymoon in Greece, weekend trips to Michigan, charity events where I'd stood proudly beside him in carefully selected dresses. In every photo, the same pattern emerged, James at the center, commanding attention. Me slightly to the side, smiling supportively, always the perfect accessory to his success. Had I always been so peripheral in my own life? Had I always dimmed my light to make his shine brighter? I remembered who I was before James. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dr. Emma Chen, research scientist with 2 published papers before 30, headhunted by 3 pharmaceutical companies before choosing the one that promised the most freedom to pursue innovative treatment approaches. The woman once described by her mentor as brilliantly determined. When had I set those dreams aside? When had I become content with being known simply as James Mitchell's wife? The transition had been gradual, so subtle I'd barely noticed it happening. First, the move from Boston to Columbus for his career opportunity, which meant leaving my research position. Then the increasing social obligations as he climbed the corporate ladder, dinners, retreats, networking events that required my presence as the supportive spouse. It's just for now, he'd assured me when I expressed interest in returning to research. Once I establish myself in the regional office, you can do whatever you want. But right now, I need you focused on us, on our future. Our future. Always. Spoken about as if it were a joint venture, though the blueprint seemed designed entirely around his ambitions. And I had accepted it, had convinced myself that my new role was equally important, equally fulfilling. I threw myself into it, planning perfect dinner parties, cultivating relationships with the wives of James's colleagues, volunteering for charities that enhanced his professional reputation. I became exactly what he needed me to be: polished, pleasant, purposefully undemanding. The memory of a particular evening surfaced, a dinner party at our home about 7 months ago. James had invited Victor Harrington, the real estate developer who owned the Lakeview Drive properties, including the Victorian house James had always coveted. I'd spent days preparing, selecting the perfect menu, arranging for our favorite caterer, choosing wines that complemented each course without appearing ostentatious. The evening had gone perfectly, conversation flowing as smoothly as the wine, until dessert, when Victor unexpectedly turned his attention to me. "James tells me you were quite the research scientist, Emma," he said, spooning into the creme brulee I'd stressed over for days. Immunology, wasn't it? Quite a high-level position from what I understand. "Oh," I'd replied, momentarily taken aback by interest in my past career. "Yes, I was, before we moved to Columbus." "She was quite good," James interjected quickly, his hand finding mine on the table in what appeared to be an affectionate gesture, though I felt the subtle pressure of his fingers, a warning to keep it brief. But we agreed that one high-powered career in the family was enough of a challenge. Laughter rippled around the table, polite and practiced. "What a shame," Victor's wife, Elaine, said, her voice carrying a note of genuine regret. "The medical research field needs more women in leadership positions." Emma has plenty of leadership opportunities with her consulting work, James responded, smoothly before I could answer. She's on the board of the Children's Hospital Foundation, aren't you, darling? I nodded, the practiced smile never leaving my face. It's very fulfilling. I'm sure it is, Victor said, but his eyes held a question as they met mine across the table. Still, talent like yours shouldn't go to waste. If you ever decide to get back in the game, give me a call. My brother runs a biotech firm that's always looking for sharp minds in immunology research. James's laugh had an edge to it. Trying. To poach my wife, Victor? Isn't it enough that you own the most beautiful property in the neighborhood? The conversation shifted then, back to real estate and property values, and I was once again relegated to the background, my brief moment in the spotlight efficiently dimmed by my husband's practiced redirection. Later that night, as we prepared for bed, James had commented casually, Victor was just being polite, about the job. I know, I'd replied automatically, though something inside me had stirred at the possibility, the first such opportunity mentioned in years. Besides, James continued, your consultancy work is much more suitable at this stage in our lives. More flexible, and it makes the right impression with my clients. The devoted wife giving back to the community while maintaining her own modest professional identity. I nodded, swallowing the strange disappointment rising in my throat. That's my girl, he'd said, kissing my forehead before turning out the light, always understanding the bigger picture. The bigger picture. His picture, with me as a minor detail in the composition. Sitting in my silent kitchen the day after he left, that conversation replayed in my mind with new clarity. How had I not seen it then? The casual dismissal of my abilities, the swift recategorizing of my identity to suit his narrative, the underlying assumption that my purpose was to reflect well on him. My phone buzzed with a text message, pulling me from my thoughts. It was from Rachel, my oldest friend, and the one person who had never quite warmed to James, despite my repeated attempts to facilitate a connection. The message was simple. Heard the news. Coming over with emergency supplies, no arguments. Despite everything, I smiled. Rachel had never been one to wait for an invitation or ask permission. It was one of the things James had found problematic about her refusal to conform to his expectations of how a proper corporate wife's friend should behave. An hour later, she swept through my front door with 2 bottles of wine, a bag of groceries, and a determined expression on her face. That absolute bastard, were her first words as she set everything down on the kitchen counter. I've wanted to say that for about 11 years, just so you know. Only 11? I asked, attempting humor despite the hollow feeling in my chest. You earned a grace period the first year, she replied, uncorking one of the wine bottles with practiced efficiency. By year 2, I knew he was trouble. Too charming, too calculated, too convinced of his own importance. She poured 2 generous glasses, sliding one across the counter to me. To freedom, she said, raising her glass, even when it comes wrapped in heartbreak, betrayal, and a disgusting side of cancer. I hesitated, then lifted my glass to meet hers. To freedom, I echoed, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. Freedom. Was that what this was? This untethered feeling? This sudden absence of expectations? This yawning uncertainty about who I was supposed to be now that I was no longer James, Mitchell's wife? I know it doesn't feel like it right now, Rachel said, as if reading my thoughts. But I promise you, Emma, this is going to turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to you. I shook my head, taking a sip of wine. He left me for his 29-year-old marketing coordinator, Rachel, while I'm going through chemotherapy. How is that possibly the best thing that ever happened to me? Because, she said firmly, now you get to remember who you were before him. Who you were always meant to be before you got sidetracked by His ambitions and his ego and his endless need to be the center of the universe. I stared into my wine glass, watching the light refract through the deep red liquid. I'm not sure I even remember who that person was. Rachel's expression softened. Well, I do. And she was magnificent, brilliant, unstoppable, and she's still in there beneath all the perfect corporate wife conditioning. We just need to wake her up right after we kick cancer's ass. For the first time since James walked out the door, I felt something other than shock and betrayal. A tiny flicker of possibility, a whisper of the woman I used to be stirring somewhere deep inside. I wouldn't even know where to start, I admitted. Rachel smiled, a determined glint in her eye. Lucky for you, I do. Step 1. We figure out exactly what that bastard left you with. Step 2. We get through your next round of chemo. Step 3. We start planning your comeback. And somewhere in there, she added, raising her glass again, we find a way to make him regret every life choice that led him away from you. 3 days after James left, I still hadn't told anyone except Rachel. I wasn't ready to face the pity, the whispered conversations, the inevitable questions about what had gone wrong. But life in Columbus's close-knit pharmaceutical community made privacy a luxury I couldn't afford for long. I was in line at Greenfield Market, the upscale grocery store where executives' wives did their shopping, when I first realized how public my humiliation would become. I'd forced myself to leave the house, determined to maintain some semblance of normality despite feeling like my world had imploded. "Emma? I thought that was you," came a voice from behind me. I turned to see Vanessa Miller, wife of one of James's colleagues and a fixture in our social circle. Her smile was too bright, her eyes too inquisitive as they darted to my left hand, still bearing my wedding ring. "Vanessa, hello," I replied, summoning the polite smile I'd perfected over years of such encounters. "How are you?" "I'm well," she said, then lowered her voice. "But how are you holding up? With everything going on?" My stomach tightened. News traveled fast in our circle, but this was lightning speed. "I'm fine, thank you," I said, the social script so ingrained I could perform it on autopilot. "Are you sure?" Vanessa's voice dropped to a theatrical whisper. "I heard about James and, well, you know." "I'm sorry?" Vanessa's eyes widened, with artificial concern. "Oh, you don't—" She stopped, covering her mouth with manicured fingers. "I assumed you knew about James and Natalie. I saw them yesterday at Riverside Bistro. They seemed quite comfortable together." Riverside Bistro, our favorite restaurant, the place where we'd celebrated our 10th anniversary. "I see," I managed, fighting to keep my expression neutral despite the knife twisting in my chest. "They're not being very discreet about it," Vanessa continued, seeming to relish her role as bearer of bad news. "Everyone's talking. I just assumed you were aware." Everyone's talking. Of course they were. In our social circle, a high-profile separation was prime gossip material, especially one involving cancer, a younger woman, and a prominent executive. "Thank you for your concern," I said, my voice steady despite the humiliation burning through me. "But James and I are handling our private matters privately." "Private." Vanessa nodded, not looking remotely convinced. "Of course. Well, if you need anything." The insincerity of her offer hung in the air between us. "I appreciate that, if you'll excuse me." I abandoned my half-filled cart and walked out of the store, dignity intact, but pride shattered. In the safety of my car, I gripped the steering. Wheel until my knuckles turned white, allowing the tears to come at last. Not just for James's betrayal. I'd already cried those tears, but for the public spectacle my life had become. The pitying glances, the whispered conversations that would stop when I entered a room, the knowledge that I was now cast as the discarded wife, the cautionary tale. the object of gossip. When I finally composed myself enough to drive, I didn't go home. Instead, I found myself parking outside the Columbus Medical Research Foundation's annual benefit gala, scheduled for that very evening. I'd helped plan this event months ago, had selected the caterer, arranged the floral displays, coordinated with the silent auction donors. It was supposed to be another evening of playing the perfect corporate wife, of bolstering James's image and connections. Now, the thought of attending, of facing all those people who knew, who were talking, who were watching for my reaction, made my stomach churn. But the alternative, hiding away while James paraded Natalie around as if our marriage had meant nothing, was worse. Decision made, I drove home and marched directly to my closet. If I was going to face the whispers, I would do it on my terms. The red dress I selected was one James had always considered too bold. "A bit desperate for a woman your age," he'd commented the one time I'd worn it. It hugged my curves in a way that made me feel powerful, confident. The woman I used to be would have worn this dress without hesitation. My body had changed with chemotherapy. I was thinner now. My once thick dark hair cropped close to my scalp after it had begun falling out in clumps. But the dress still fit, highlighting what remained of my curves. I paired it with a silver head wrap that transformed my medical necessity into a fashion statement, applied makeup that accentuated my features, and slipped into heels that added 3 inches to my height. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself, not because of the changes from cancer treatment, but because of the determination in my eyes. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I looked like myself. Not James Mitchell's wife, but Dr. Emma Chen. 4 hours later, I stepped into the grand ballroom of the Riverside Convention Center alone, head held high despite the nervous flutter in my stomach. The room was already filled with Columbus's medical elite, the air buzzing with conversation and the clink of champagne glasses. I felt the shift immediately, the subtle turning of heads, the quick glances, the whispered exchanges. I was the evening's unexpected entertainment, the abandoned wife with cancer, brave enough or foolish enough to show her face. Rachel materialized at my side within moments, resplendent in emerald green and righteous anger. "You didn't tell me you were coming," she hissed, linking her arm with mine in a show of solidarity. "I would have picked you up." "Last-minute decision," I replied, accepting a glass of sparkling water from a passing server. Seemed better than sitting home alone imagining it. "Well, you look incredible," she said firmly, like a woman about to burn down her ex's life. I managed a small smile. Not burning, just refusing to disappear. "Even better," Rachel nodded approvingly. "Oh, heads up, 3 o'clock. The human embodiment of midlife crisis and his infant girlfriend have arrived." I turned, following her gaze to the entrance where James was indeed making his entrance with Natalie on his arm. She was wearing a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, a dress that, I realized with a fresh stab of humiliation, he had likely purchased for her with our joint funds. But it wasn't their appearance that caught me off guard. I'd prepared myself for that inevitable moment. It was their reception. Rather than the awkward silence or subtle distancing I'd expected from our social circle, they were being welcomed warmly. Handshakes for James, air kisses for Natalie. Business as usual. People have short memories when there's money and power involved, Rachel muttered, correctly interpreting my expression. "Especially these people." I watched as Dr. William Matthews, the foundation's director, and one of Columbus's most influential medical figures, greeted James with a collegial backslap before turning an appreciative eye to Natalie. The message was clear. In this world, I was replaceable, disposable, just an accessory that had been upgraded for a newer model. Emma. Victor Harrington, the real estate developer from our dinner party, approached with careful courtesy. "It's good to see you here tonight." "Is it?" I asked, my voice sharper than intended. I rather thought I'd be persona non grata at these events going forward. Victor had the grace to look uncomfortable. You've always been valued in your own right. You know that. Have I? I glanced meaningfully across the room where James was now introducing Natalie to a group of researchers. Funny how quickly 12 years of relationships can be reassigned. It's not like that, Victor protested weakly. It's exactly like that, I countered. But don't worry, I'm not here to make a scene, just to remind everyone that I haven't evaporated simply because James decided I was inconvenient to his narrative. Before Victor could respond, the room's attention was drawn to the small stage where Dr. Matthews was tapping a microphone. Welcome everyone to our annual benefit gala, he began, his voice filling the ballroom. Before we begin tonight's program, I'd like to recognize some of the key people who made this event possible. I sipped my sparkling water, expecting to be overlooked despite my months of work on the event. It wouldn't be the first time my contributions had been attributed to James or simply ignored. First, our major donors and sponsors, Matthews continued, listing off names of companies and individuals. James's name received enthusiastic applause. And special thanks to James Mitchell and his team for their work on the silent auction items, Matthews added. James has always had an eye for value, as evidenced by his recent personal acquisitions. A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the crowd. Beside me, Rachel inhaled sharply. Did he just make a joke about James trading you in? She whispered. Incredulous. Yes, he did, I said quietly, my cheeks burning with humiliation. Across the room, I saw James grin, his arm tightening around Natalie's waist as she giggled. In that moment, something inside me hardened. This wasn't just about James leaving me. This was about an entire system that treated women as disposable, that rewarded men for discarding their aging, ill wives, that turned a decade and a half of my life into a punchline. I need some air, I murmured to Rachel, setting down my glass and moving toward the terrace doors. Outside, the cool night air was a balm against my flushed skin. I gripped the stone balustrade, breathing deeply, fighting back tears that were as much anger as hurt. Mrs. Mitchell, a deep voice interrupted my thoughts. Or is it Dr. Chen now? I'm not sure of the protocol. I turned to find Victor Harrington, watching me with a concerned expression. Neither am I admitted, straightening my shoulders. But Emma is fine. He nodded, moving to stand beside me at the railing. That was a cheap shot in there, uncalled for. I appreciated that he didn't pretend not to know what had upset me. Apparently, I'm the punchline of the season, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Not to everyone, he said firmly. Some of us remember who did the actual work all these years while James took the credit. I glanced at him, surprised. What do you mean? Victor laughed softly. You think we didn't notice? The connections you cultivated, the relationships you maintained, the subtle course corrections whenever James was about to put his foot in his mouth. You were the secret weapon, Emma, the emotional intelligence behind his success. His words washed over me like a revelation. All these years, I'd assumed my contributions went unnoticed, unvalued by anyone except James. And even his appreciation had been conditional, utilitarian. He never saw it that way, I said quietly. His loss, Victor replied simply. By the way, I meant what I said at dinner that night about there being a place for you in my brother's company. The offer still stands. Once you're through treatment, of course. I started to automatically decline, the reflex of a woman trained to minimize her own ambitions, but stopped myself. Why shouldn't I consider it? What was holding me back now? I might be interested in discussing that, I said slowly. Victor smiled, reaching into his jacket pocket and producing a business card. Call my office when you're ready. We'll set something up. As he walked away, I turned the card over in my fingers, feeling the weight of possibility it represented. For the first time since James left, I felt something other than humiliation and grief. I felt the stirring of purpose, the first inklings of a plan. Victor Harrington's business card sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days. I'd walk past it, pick it up, set it down again, my mind a battlefield of competing voices. You're not ready. You've been out of research too long. Who do you think you are? What if you fail? The loudest voice, the one that sounded suspiciously like James, kept repeating, "You're 40. Starting over is for younger women, women like Natalie." I sat at the counter on the 4th morning, coffee growing cold between my palms, staring at that embossed rectangle of possibility. My phone buzzed with an incoming call, James's lawyer, the 3rd call this week. I let it go to voicemail, already, knowing the message, papers ready to sign, settlement terms to discuss, the business-like dismantling of 12 years. Outside, rain streaked the windows in rivulets that matched my internal state. Blurry, directionless, caught between earth and sky, the house felt too big now, too empty without the force of James's personality filling every corner. Or maybe it was that I'd made myself too small, compressing my own needs and desires until they barely registered. The doorbell rang, startling me from my thoughts. Rachel stood on the porch, raincoat glistening with droplets, determination written across her face. "Intervention time," she announced, brushing past me into the foyer. "You're not answering. My texts. You haven't been returning calls, and from the looks of it," she gestured to my pajamas, worn for the 2nd day straight, "you're in full retreat mode." "I'm processing," I corrected her, following her into the kitchen where she immediately began brewing fresh coffee. "Processing is healthy. Hiding is not," she said, spotting Victor's card on the counter and picking it up. "You haven't called." Him. It wasn't a question. "I'm not ready," I said defensively. "Bull," Rachel said flatly, turning to face me. "You're scared. There's a difference." "Maybe I have reason to be," I retorted, irritation flaring. "I've been out of research for over a decade. My knowledge is outdated. My skills are rusty at best. And in case you haven't noticed, I'm in the middle of cancer treatment." "So?" She handed me a fresh mug of coffee. "The real issue isn't your qualifications or your health, Emma. It's that you've spent so long being defined as James's wife that you don't know who you are without that label." Her words hit with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, cutting straight to the heart of my hesitation. For 12 years, every decision I'd made, every relationship I'd cultivated, every aspect of my public persona had been in service to James's career and our shared social standing. Who was I without that framework? What remained of Dr. Emma Chen beneath years of carefully constructed Mrs. Mitchell? "I saw them yesterday," I said quietly, changing the subject. "James and Natalie. They were looking at houses in Lakeview." Rachel's expression softened. And they looked happy. I swallowed against the unexpected tightness in my throat. "Like we used to be. In the beginning, before everything became about his career, his ambition, his image." "You mean, before he systematically dismantled your confidence and independence?" Rachel's bluntness was both painful and necessary. "Before he convinced you that his dreams were the only ones that mattered." "It wasn't like that," I protested weakly. "Not at first. He was supportive of my research initially. He used to brag about how brilliant I was." "Until your brilliance threatened to outshine him," Rachel countered. "Then suddenly it made more sense for you to focus on being the corporate wife." She wasn't wrong. I remembered the subtle shift, the way James's pride in my accomplishments had gradually transformed into something else. Gentle suggestions that my work hours were putting strain on our relationship. Casual comments about how certain executives' wives managed their homes personally rather than relying on staff. Pointed observations about the importance of being available for networking events. Little by little, my world had contracted, rearranging itself around James's priorities until I could no longer distinguish where his ambitions ended and mine began. I don't even know if I want to go back to research, I admitted. Maybe that's not who I am anymore. Then figure out who you are now, Rachel said simply. But do it actively, not hiding in this mausoleum to your marriage. She gestured. Around the kitchen, all sleek surfaces and designer appliances, selected to impress rather than comfort. This house, these things, they were chosen to reflect James's taste, James's success, James's image. None of it is really you, Emma. I glanced around, seeing our home through new eyes. The austere modern furniture I'd never found comfortable. The minimalist color palette I'd secretly found depressing. The absence of anything truly personal. No family photos, no mementos, nothing that couldn't fit into James's carefully curated aesthetic. You're right, I said slowly. None of this is me. I'm not even sure I know what me looks like anymore. Then that's where we start, Rachel declared, pulling out a chair and sitting across from me, her expression serious. Before you decide about Victor's offer or anything else, you need to reconnect with yourself, the real Emma, not James Mitchell's carefully constructed wife. And how exactly do I do that? I asked, a hint of desperation creeping into my voice. By remembering who you were before him, the woman with opinions and passions and plans that had nothing to do with being someone's perfect accessory. Rachel reached across the counter and took my hand. She's still in there, Emma. You just need to give her permission to exist again. That afternoon, after Rachel left, I found myself standing in our shared home office, or rather, what had once been my office before it gradually transformed into James's space. I ran my fingers over the sleek desk where I'd once drafted research, proposals, the bookshelves that had once held my medical journals now filled with James's business books and industry awards. In the back of the closet, I found a box labeled Emma Pre-Columbus. Inside were relics of my former life, framed, diplomas, copies of my published papers, a lab coat still bearing the logo of my previous research institution. I lifted out a medical journal from 7 years ago, with my name in the contributors list. My younger self stared back at me from the small author photo, confident, ambitious, unaware that within a year she would walk away from everything she'd built. Immunology research is about solving puzzles no one else can see, I'd been quoted as saying. About recognizing patterns in chaos and finding connections that change how we understand disease. I'd been good at it, at seeing patterns, at making connections, at designing experiments that yielded unexpected insights. Those skills hadn't disappeared. They'd simply been redirected toward enhancing James's social standing rather than advancing medical knowledge. What would happen if I reclaimed that expertise for myself? If I stopped using my analytical mind to smooth James's path and started applying it to my own journey? I spent the rest of the day excavating pieces of my former self from storage bins and forgotten drawers. Old research notes, conference badges, a half-finished proposal for a study on autoimmune responses that I'd set aside when we moved to Columbus. Each recovered artifact felt like reconnecting with a long-lost friend. By evening, these pieces of my past were spread across the living room floor, a physical map of the woman I'd once been, the woman I might become again. My phone rang. James's number, not his lawyer's this time. I stared at the screen, heart pounding with an emotion I couldn't immediately identify. Hello, I answered, my voice steadier than I expected. Emma. James's familiar voice, the one that had narrated my life for 12 years. We need to talk about the settlement. No greeting, no inquiry about my health or well-being. Just business, as if our marriage had been nothing more than a merger now requiring dissolution. I'm busy right now, I replied, surprising myself with the ease of the refusal. Your lawyer has been calling. I'll deal with him directly. This would be simpler if we could discuss it ourselves, James pressed. There's no need to make this contentious. I'm not being contentious, I said. I'm being direct. Unless you have something personal to discuss, I prefer to handle this through proper channels. A pause then. Are you okay? You sound different. I almost laughed. Different. Yes, I supposed I did. I'm fine, James. Better than fine, actually. I'm remembering something important. What's that? He sounded genuinely curious, perhaps even concerned. Who I was before I became Mrs. Mitchell. I said it simply, without accusation or bitterness, just a statement of fact. Another pause, longer this time. I never asked you to stop being yourself, Emma. This time I did laugh, a soft exhalation of disbelief. No, you just created a life where there wasn't room for both your ambitions and mine. You never had to ask explicitly. You just designed a reality where the only way I could fit was by making myself smaller. That's not fair, he protested, echoing his words from the day he left. Maybe not, I conceded. But it's true, and the remarkable thing is I let you do it. I participated in my own diminishment. But that's over now. What does that mean? A new note in his voice, wariness, perhaps even a touch of alarm. It means I'll have my lawyer contact yours about the settlement, I replied calmly. Goodbye, James. I ended the call before he could respond, my hand shaking slightly, but my mind clearer than it had been in days, perhaps years. The business card still sat on the kitchen counter, a decision waiting to be made. I picked it up, running my thumb over the embossed lettering of Victor Harrington's name, feeling the weight of opportunity it represented. Before I could second-guess myself, I reached for my phone and dialed the number. Victor Harrington's office, a professional voice answered. This is Emma Chen, I said, then caught myself. Actually, it's still Emma Mitchell legally, but I'm going by Chen again. I'd like to schedule a meeting with Mr. Harrington about the position we discussed. As I set up the appointment for the following week, I felt something shift inside me. The first tentative steps of a woman reclaiming her power, her identity, her future. I arrived at Harrington Biotech precisely 15 minutes early for my appointment, dressed in a tailored navy suit I'd unearthed from the back of my closet. The outfit had been a staple of my professional wardrobe in my previous life. Before, cocktail dresses and charity gala attire became my uniform. With my headscarf arranged in a style that suggested fashion rather than necessity, I felt more like my old self than I had in years. The receptionist smiled warmly. Dr. Chen, Mr. Harrington, is expecting you. Dr. Chen, not Mrs. Mitchell. The sound of my professional name felt like slipping into an old, comfortable pair of shoes, once familiar, now slightly strange, but increasingly right with each step. Victor's office reflected his reputation for understated elegance, comfortable but not ostentatious, impressive without trying too hard. The man himself rose from behind his desk as I entered, his handshake firm and welcoming. Emma, thank you for coming in. He gestured to a seating area by the window with a view of the Columbus skyline. Coffee? I nodded, settling into an armchair, my nerves having subsided on the drive over, replaced by a strange calm. The kind that comes when you've already lost what you thought was most important and realize you're still standing. I was pleased to get your call, Victor said, handing me a cup, though I'll admit I wasn't sure you'd take me up on the offer. Neither was I admitted. It's been a long time since I've thought of myself in professional terms. And yet, your research reputation was substantial. He leaned back, studying me. People still talk about your paper on cytokine responses in autoimmune disorders. Change the approach to several treatment protocols. I blinked, surprised he knew about that. That was almost 12 years ago. Good science doesn't expire, Emma, he smiled, and neither does talent. The question is whether you still want to use yours. The directness of his question was refreshing after years of James's careful manipulations. The way he'd wrap criticisms and compliments, suggestions and seeming concern for my well-being. I do. I said firmly. Though I'm rusty, admittedly, and there's the matter of my treatment. Knowledge can be refreshed, skills rebuilt. Victor sat down his coffee, his expression serious. As for the treatment, my brother's company has one of the most comprehensive employee health programs in the industry, including flexible scheduling for medical needs. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. If I may speak candidly, Emma, what I'm offering isn't charity. David needs someone with your specific expertise for a new research initiative. The timing is unfortunate with your health challenges, but if you're willing to work through them, we're willing to accommodate. For the next hour, we discussed the position. Research Director for Harrington Biotech's new immunotherapy division, focusing on precisely the kind of work I'd been passionate about before leaving research. By the time Victor walked me to the elevator, I had a formal offer letter and a start date for 3 weeks later, allowing me to complete my current round of treatment. "Welcome aboard, Emma," he said, shaking my hand again. "David is looking forward to meeting you." As the elevator doors closed, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the polished metal, cheeks flushed with excitement, eyes bright with purpose. I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. She looked alive. The contrast became even starker that evening when I arrived home to find James's BMW in the driveway. My stomach clenched instinctively, my body responding to the familiar sight, before my mind could catch up. He was sitting in the kitchen, looking slightly out of place despite having lived there for years. The sight of him, the familiar slope of his shoulders, the way his hair fell across his forehead, sent a complicated wave of emotions through me. Anger, loss, a traitorous flicker of longing for the man I'd once believed him to be. "You changed. The entry code," he said by way of greeting. "I had to wait for the neighbor to let me in. I didn't realize you'd be coming by." I set my purse on the counter, maintaining distance between us. "You should have called." "I did. You didn't." Answer. He studied me, taking in the suit, the slight makeup, the professional demeanor I'd abandoned years ago at his subtle urging. "You look different." "I had a job interview," I replied, watching his expression shift from surprise to something harder to read. "I start in 3 weeks. A job?" He leaned back, brow furrowing. "With whom?" "Harrington Biotech." A flash of irritation crossed his face. "Victor Harrington? Seriously, Emma? Is there a problem with that?" I kept my voice level, though my pulse had quickened. "He's a direct competitor to half my clients," James replied, as if this should be obvious. "It puts me in an awkward position." "Your position is no longer my primary concern," I eyed him steadily. "We're getting divorced, remember?" He had the grace to look momentarily abashed, but pressed on. "Even so, there are certain professional courtesies, loyalties built over years. Your loyalties, James, not mine." I moved to the refrigerator, pulling out a bottle of water more to create physical activity than from actual thirst. "Besides, you didn't seem concerned about professional courtesy when you began sleeping with your assistant." He flinched. "That's different." "Is it? You made choices prioritizing your happiness without considering how they affected me. I'm doing the same." James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache despite everything. "I didn't come here to argue." "Why did you come?" I asked, genuinely curious. "To collect some things, and to give you this." He slid a folder across the counter toward me. "The settlement proposal from my lawyer." I left the folder where it sat. "I told you I'll have my lawyer review any proposals." "You haven't even hired a lawyer yet," he pointed out, frustration edging into his voice. "You're dragging this out unnecessarily." "Because I'm not adhering to your timeline?" I raised an eyebrow. "I've been a bit preoccupied with rebuilding the life you demolished, James." "I didn't demolish anything," he protested. "Marriages and People move on. It happens every day. Yes, they do. But most people don't discard 12 years like yesterday's newspaper. He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose in the way he did when he felt misunderstood. A gesture I'd once found endearing, but now recognized as a tactic, a subtle shifting of blame. This is exactly why I wanted to handle this directly. You're making it emotional. It is emotional, I countered. Or it should be. For 12 years, I shaped my entire existence around supporting your dreams, your goals, your image. I gave up my career, my independence, my sense of self. And you want me to process all of that on your convenient timeline? Something flickered in his eyes, guilt perhaps, or simply impatience. I never asked you to give up those things. Didn't you? I shook my head. Maybe not explicitly, but you created conditions where I couldn't maintain them and still be what you needed, what you wanted. That's not fair, he said, repeating his favorite defense. I've been thinking a lot about fairness lately, I replied, about how I let you define what was fair, what was reasonable, what was best for us. I'm done with that now, James. I'll review the settlement when I'm ready, with my lawyer present. He stood, frustration evident in the tight line of his shoulders. Fine. Take your time, but don't use this divorce to punish me for moving on. The accusation stung, more for its inaccuracy than anything else. This isn't about punishment. It's about finally prioritizing myself after years of putting you first. As I said the words, I realized their truth. This wasn't about getting back at James or trying to hurt him the way he'd hurt me. It was about reclaiming my power, my agency, my right to make decisions based on my own needs, rather than his convenience. He moved toward the hallway, pausing at the threshold. I'll get my things and go. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak further. The sounds of him moving through the house, opening drawers, collecting items from the bathroom, created a strange dissonance. This man who had occupied the center of my universe for 12 years was now just a visitor, gathering the remnants of his presence before disappearing again. When he returned, arms full of clothing and toiletries, his expression had softened slightly. For what it's worth, I think it's good you're going back to research. You were always talented. The compliment, likely meant as a peace offering, landed like a backhanded slap. Always talented, yet he'd systematically undermined that talent, redirected it toward supporting his ambitions rather than nurturing my own. I know, I said simply. I just forgot for a while. He hesitated, seeming on the verge of saying something more, then thought better of it. With a nod, he walked past me toward the door. James, I called after him, a sudden thought occurring to me. The Lakeview Victorian, the one you've been looking at with Natalie. Are you still planning to buy it? He turned, surprise evident in his expression. Of course. Why? I shrugged. Just curious about where you and Natalie plan to settle. A shadow crossed his face at the mention of her name. We haven't discussed. He stopped, regrouping. My professional interests and personal arrangements are separate matters. Of course, I echoed, offering a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Just curious. After he left, I sat at the kitchen counter, the settlement folder still untouched, beside me. For the first time, I allowed myself to really examine the deterioration of our relationship. Not just the final betrayal of his affair, but the years of small erosions that had preceded it. The way his criticisms had grown more frequent, more pointed as I aged. The increasingly public displays of impatience when I expressed opinions that differed from his. The gradual decline in physical affection, in genuine interest in my thoughts, in the basic courtesy that should exist between partners. It hadn't happened overnight. Like water wearing away stone, it had been a gradual process, so subtle I'd barely noticed until the damage was done. What struck me most powerfully was my own complicity in this erosion. I had accepted his diminishments, had adjusted my behavior to avoid his displeasure, had slowly surrendered pieces of myself to maintain the peace. I had participated in my own disappearance, but no more. The woman who had sat across from Victor Harrington today, who had stood her ground with James tonight, she was somebody new. Or rather, somebody rediscovered, like a painting that had been hidden beneath layers of varnish, now being carefully, deliberately restored. I opened the settlement folder at last, scanning the terms James was proposing. As I suspected, they heavily favored him: minimal alimony, a quick sale of our shared properties with the proceeds primarily directed toward his investment funds, a clean break that would leave him unburdened and me struggling to rebuild. I closed the folder with a quiet determination. This too would need to change. My first 2 weeks at Harrington Biotech passed in a blur of activity. I'd forgotten the particular rhythm of research life, the structured experiments, the focused discussions, the satisfaction of applying expertise to concrete problems. My immunology knowledge, though rusty, returned more quickly than I'd expected, like muscle memory awakening after a long dormancy. David Harrington had assembled a talented team, and I found myself energized by their ideas, their enthusiasm, their respect for my experience despite my years away from the field. By Friday of my second week, I'd presented a comprehensive research proposal for a new immunotherapy approach that had earned approving nods from around the conference table. "Excellent work, Emma," David said after the meeting, walking me back to my new office. "You've exceeded expectations already." The simple praise, offered without qualification or hidden agenda, felt like water after a drought. For years, James's compliments had always contained subtle redirections. "You're so good at handling people, that's why you're better suited to the social side of our life," or "Your attention to detail is impressive, that's why I need you focused on our home rather than diluting your energy elsewhere." That evening, I worked late, losing myself in the details of an experimental protocol. The office had emptied hours ago, the cleaning staff making their rounds as I finalized the research parameters. When my phone buzzed with a text message, I expected it to be Rachel checking in. Instead, James's name appeared on the screen. "We need to talk. Can I come by the house tonight?" I hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard. In the 5 weeks since our last encounter, I'd hired a lawyer, formally rejected his settlement proposal, and begun negotiating terms that actually reflected my contributions to our marriage. His lawyer had been increasingly frustrated by my refusal to simply accept what was offered and disappear quietly. "What about?" I replied finally. "Us. I've been doing some thinking. Please." The unexpected plea caught me off guard. In 12 years of marriage, I could count on one hand the number of times James had said please in that context, an actual request rather than a disguised demand. "I'll be home in an hour," I texted back, a strange uneasiness settling in my stomach. The drive home gave me time to process my reaction. Why, after everything, did those two simple words, some thinking, trigger such an immediate response? Why did a part of me still leap toward the possibility of reconciliation despite all evidence that our relationship had been fundamentally unbalanced? I found James waiting on the front steps, a bottle of wine in hand. Not just any wine, but the specific Cabernet we'd discovered on our honeymoon in Napa Valley. The symbolic gesture wasn't subtle. "You cut your hair," he said as I approached, his eyes taking in the stylish pixie cut that had replaced my headscarf now that my hair was growing back. Another recent change, part of my ongoing reclamation project. "I did," I acknowledged, unlocking the door without further comment. "Come in." He followed me inside, his presence still disconcertingly familiar in the space we'd shared for years. In the kitchen, he opened the wine while I retrieved glasses, the domestic choreography still ingrained despite our separation. "You're looking well," he offered, sliding a glass toward me. "The cancer treatments must be working." "They are," I confirmed, taking a small sip. "The tumor is shrinking. My oncologist is optimistic." An awkward silence fell between us, heavy with unspoken words. "Why are you here, James?" I asked finally. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I once would have found endearing. "Direct as always. That's one of the things I've always admired about you." I waited, not filling the silence as I would have done in the past. "I've been thinking about us," he finally continued. "About what happened. About what went wrong." "And?" I prompted when he paused again. "And I think I made a mistake." He met my eyes, his expression contrite, leaving the way I did, ending things so abruptly. I set my glass down carefully. "You're saying you regret leaving me for Natalie while I was going through cancer treatment?" A flicker of hesitation crossed his face. "I'm saying I regret how things ended between us. 12 years deserved better than that." The careful phrasing wasn't lost on me. He regretted the method, not the decision itself. "I appreciate the, acknowledgement," I said neutrally. "That's it?" A note of frustration entered his voice. "I'm trying to have a real conversation here, Emma." "About what exactly? You've expressed regret for how you left, not that you left." "What do you want from this conversation, James? Absolution? Friendship? A more agreeable approach to the divorce settlement?" He sighed, leaning against the counter. "Maybe all of those things. Is that so wrong? We were important to each other for a long time. I'd like to think we still could be in some way." "Where's Natalie tonight?" I asked, changing tack. A shadow crossed his face. "That's complicated." Understanding dawned. "Ah, things aren't working out as perfectly as you imagined." "It's not that simple," he said defensively. "Relationships are complex. You know that." "I do," I agreed. "Which is why I'm surprised you seem to think you can walk back into my life with a bottle of wine and vague expressions of regret, and somehow that erases the past few months." "I'm not trying to erase anything," he protested. "I'm trying to repair some of the damage, to find a way forward that honors what we meant to each other." I considered his words, turning them over like stones in my hand, examining them from different angles. 6 weeks ago, this overture might have broken me, might have kindled desperate hope. Now, I could see it clearly for what it was. "The problem is," I said finally, "you're still approaching this from the perspective of what you want. What would make things easier for you? What would alleviate your guilt or discomfort?" "That's not fair," he began, falling back on his standard defense. "Let me finish," I interrupted, surprising us both with my firmness. "You're not here because you've had some profound realization about how you treated me, or because you genuinely want to make amends. You're here because something in your new perfect life isn't working out as planned, and you've decided that maybe the old arrangement wasn't so bad after all." His flinch told me I'd hit the mark. "It's more complicated than that." "Is it?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks remarkably simple. Things with Natalie have hit a rough patch, and suddenly you remember I exist." He took a long swallow of wine, his expression shifting toward the carefully managed charm that had once seemed so genuine to me. "Maybe I just miss you. Is that so hard to believe?" "What do you miss exactly?" I asked, genuinely curious now. "My support, my willingness to arrange my life around your convenience, the comfort of knowing someone was always there, handling the details you didn't want to bother with." "That's unnecessarily harsh," he said, a hint of the familiar cold edge entering his voice. "We had a good marriage for many years." "Did we? Or did you have a good arrangement, and I convinced myself it was what I wanted too?" He set his glass, down with more force than necessary. "I see Harrington Biotech has been filling your head with revisionist history." This has nothing to do with my job, I said evenly. This is about me finally seeing our marriage clearly, without the filter of trying to make it work at any cost. James studied me, something like genuine regret flickering in his eyes. You really have changed. Yes, I agreed simply. I have. We regarded each other across the kitchen island, 12 years of shared history stretching between us like a bridge that had begun to crumble, too damaged for either of us to cross safely. I should go, he said finally, leaving his half-finished wine on the counter. I nodded, walking him to the door in silence. At the threshold, he turned, hesitation in his expression. For what it's worth, he said quietly. I did love you, Emma. In my way. I know, I replied, understanding the truth of it even as I recognized the inadequacy. In your way. But it turns out that wasn't enough for either of us. After he left, I returned to the kitchen and poured the remaining wine down the sink, watching the deep red liquid disappear. His attempt at reconciliation, if that's even what it had been, had left me feeling strangely empty. Not from heartbreak, but from the realization that the man I'd devoted my life to had never really seen me at all. Not as I was, not as I could be, only as I functioned in relation to him. For the first time since he'd walked out, I felt something close to gratitude for the ending of our marriage. Not because it hadn't hurt, it had deeply, but because that ending had forced me to begin again, to rediscover the woman who existed beyond James Mitchell's wife. With my next treatment scheduled for tomorrow morning, I prepared for bed, mentally reviewing the research protocols I'd established at work. Despite the physical challenges of cancer and the emotional aftermath of James's visit, I felt more fully alive than I had in years. I was building something new, not just a career or potentially a new relationship with my health, but a sense of self that existed independent of my marital status. A foundation solid enough to support whatever came next. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself thinking about the Victorian house on Lakeview Drive, the one James had coveted for so long, the one he was now pursuing with Natalie. Tomorrow, after my treatment, I decided I would call Victor Harrington and ask him a very specific question about his real estate holdings. The decision brought a smile to my lips as sleep finally claimed me. I stood in Victor Harrington's office the following afternoon, still wearing the hospital identification bracelet from my morning chemotherapy session. My energy was low, as it always was on treatment days, but the information Victor had just shared sent a surge of adrenaline through me that temporarily pushed aside my fatigue. You're absolutely certain? I asked, unable to keep the incredulity from my voice. Victor nodded, leaning back in his leather chair. The Lakeview Victorian isn't just going up for sale. It's going to auction in 3 weeks. The divorcing owners couldn't agree on a price, so the court ordered liquidation. And James doesn't know this yet? A smile tugged at the corner of Victor's mouth. The listing agent is a close friend. It won't be publicly announced until next week. James and his realtor believe they have an inside track on a private sale. I sank into the chair across from his desk, mind racing with possibilities. The Victorian on Lakeview Drive had been James's dream home for years, the symbol of success he'd always chased, the physical manifestation of making it in Columbus society. For as long as I could remember, he'd pointed it out whenever we drove past, spinning elaborate fantasies about the dinner parties we'd host there, the business connections he'd cultivate in its carefully manicured gardens. What's the expected opening bid? I asked, surprising myself with the question. Victor named a figure that made my breath catch. It was substantial, far more than I could afford on my research director's salary, even with the generous compensation package Harrington Biotech had offered. Just curious, I said quickly, masking my disappointment. It's a beautiful property. Victor studied me, his shrewd eyes missing nothing. Emma, forgive me for being blunt, but are you interested in the Victorian because you want it, or because James does? The question caught me off guard with its precision. I'd been asking myself the same thing since learning the house might be available. Was this about reclaiming my own desires, or simply thwarting his? I'm not entirely sure, I admitted. Maybe both. He nodded, seeming to appreciate my honesty. Fair enough. For what it's worth, I think you'd make much better use of that house than James ever would. He sees it as a trophy. You might see it as a home. It's irrelevant anyway, I sighed. The price is well beyond my reach. Victor was quiet for a moment, then opened his desk drawer and removed a folder. There's something I've been meaning to discuss with you, independent of this house situation. The preliminary results from your immunotherapy trials are exceeding expectations. I nodded, the professional pride helping to momentarily offset my physical discomfort. My research team had made remarkable progress in the 6 weeks since I'd joined Harrington Biotech, developing a promising approach to breast cancer treatment that targeted specific immune markers. The board has approved an accelerated development track based on your initial findings, Victor continued. And with that comes some financial considerations. He slid the folder across to me. Inside was a contract amendment offering a substantial licensing fee for my research protocols, along with a structured royalty arrangement should the treatment reach market approval. This is significant, I said, scanning the numbers with widening eyes. It's fair compensation for groundbreaking work, Victor replied simply. Your approach could save countless lives, Emma, including perhaps your own. I looked up sharply. You know about my specific diagnosis? David mentioned your case has informed some of your research directions. He didn't share details, but it wasn't hard to connect the dots. Victor leaned forward. This isn't charity or special treatment. It's recognition of intellectual property value. I studied the contract, my scientific mind automatically calculating what this would mean financially. With my existing savings and this unexpected windfall, the Victorians' auction suddenly seemed less like an impossible fantasy. The timing is coincidental, Victor added, as if reading my thoughts, but perhaps fortuitous. The auction, I said slowly. How does it work exactly? Victor smiled, recognizing the shift in my thinking. I'd be happy to walk you through it. My brother George handles most of our real estate acquisitions. He's something of an expert on property auctions. I could arrange a meeting, if you're interested. I should have felt hesitation, uncertainty, perhaps even guilt about considering such a major purchase. Instead, a calm determination settled over me. This wasn't about revenge against James. This was about reclaiming something that had been as much my dream as his. A home that represented success and stability. One that I could shape according to my own vision rather than someone else's expectations. I would be very interested, I said firmly, as soon as possible. 3 days later, I sat across from George Harrington in the conference room of his real estate development firm. Unlike his brothers Victor and David, George had a more casual demeanor, relaxed but razor-sharp, with an encyclopedic knowledge of Columbus property values and auction strategies. The key to success at these auctions, he explained, spreading out comparable property sales data, is having a clear limit and sticking to it no matter what. Emotions run high in the room, especially when there are multiple interested parties. I nodded, appreciating his straightforward approach. And you think James will be there? Almost certainly, George confirmed. His company has made inquiries about the property for years. According to my sources, he's assembling an investment group to ensure he has sufficient funds. The thought of facing James in the auction room sent a flutter of anxiety through me, but I pushed it aside. My cancer treatment had taught me to distinguish between productive and unproductive fears, to acknowledge them, then focus on what I could control. What's a realistic bidding ceiling for this property? I asked. George named a figure slightly higher than what Victor had initially suggested. But I wouldn't go beyond that. The market's strong, but you don't want to overpay, even for your dream home. My dream home. The phrase resonated in a way I hadn't expected. For so long, I'd thought of the Victorian as James's obsession, but the truth was, I'd loved that house too. I'd just subordinated my desire to his, as I had with so many things over the years. I'll need to get pre-approved for financing, I said, shifting into practical planning mode. George shook his head. These auctions require proof of funds before bidding. No financing contingencies. So I need the full amount available on auction day? My heart sank. Even with Harrington Biotech's generous compensation, a cash purchase of that magnitude would be challenging. Not necessarily in cash, George clarified, but in accessible assets, savings, investments, liquidable securities. The settlement has to close within 30 days. The settlement. The divorce negotiations were still ongoing, with James dragging his feet on financial disclosures. While my lawyer assured me we were in a strong position, the timeline meant I couldn't count on those assets being available before the auction. I'll need to review my finances carefully, I said, not ready to abandon the possibility, but recognizing the obstacles. Do that, George advised. And if you decide to proceed, I'll help you prepare a bidding strategy. That evening, I sat at my dining room table, financial statements spread before me, calculator in hand. The numbers were sobering. Even with the licensing agreement from Harrington Biotech, I would be stretching my resources dangerously thin to competitively bid on the Victorian. My phone rang, Rachel calling for our daily check-in. How was treatment today? She asked when I answered. Exhausting, I admitted. But my blood work is improving. The oncologist is pleased with my progress. That's what I like to hear. And how's the world's most badass cancer-fighting research director otherwise? I hesitated, then plunged ahead, contemplating something either incredibly empowering or spectacularly foolish. Those are often the same thing, Rachel replied without missing a beat. Tell me more. I explained the situation with the Victorian, James's interest in it, and my own emerging desire to claim the house for myself. Let me get this straight, Rachel said when I finished. You want to outbid your soon-to-be ex-husband for his dream house while you're undergoing cancer treatment and rebuilding your career? It sounds ridiculous when you put it that way, I conceded. Ridiculous? It's magnificent, Rachel declared. The kind of power move people write books about. It's not about power, I protested, though part of me recognized the satisfaction I'd feel if I succeeded. It's about reclaiming something I want. Are you sure you actually want this house? Emma, really sure? Because that's a lot of money to spend on spite. It was the same question Victor had asked, the same one I'd been asking myself. Did I truly want the Victorian, or was I merely reacting to James's desire for it? I think I do, I said slowly. When James first pointed out that house years ago, I fell in love with it too. The wraparound porch, the garden spaces, the guest house that would make a perfect home laboratory. I just never expressed how much I wanted it, because his wanting always took precedence. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then go get your house. Emma, but be smart about it. Don't overextend yourself financially and don't make this about him. Make it about you. The finances are the sticking point, I sighed. Even with everything I have, I might get outbid. What about your parents? Rachel suggested. They've been worried sick about you. They'd probably love to help. I hadn't considered asking my parents for assistance. After marrying James, I'd maintained a careful distance, partly because he found them provincial with their modest academic backgrounds, and partly because I'd been embarrassed by how completely I'd abandoned the values they'd instilled in me: independence, intellectual curiosity, prioritizing meaning over status. I haven't even told them about the divorce yet, I admitted, shame coloring my voice. Or the cancer. I've been sending cheerful emails about how busy we are, how successful James's business is doing. Emma Chen. Rachel's voice took on the stern tone she reserved for my most egregious self-deceptions. Call your parents. Tonight. They deserve to know what's happening in your life, and you deserve their support. After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone for nearly an hour before finally dialing the familiar number. When my mother's voice answered, warm and immediate despite the late hour in Seattle, tears sprang to my eyes. "Mom," I said, my voice breaking, "I need to tell you something." 2 hours later, I ended the call with a promise to visit as soon as my treatment schedule allowed. I'd told them everything: the cancer diagnosis, James's abandonment, my return to research, and even my interest in the Victorian. My parents' response had been everything I'd needed, but feared I didn't deserve. Unconditional love, righteous anger on my behalf, and practical offers of support, including financial assistance if I decided to pursue the house. "Your father, and I have been saving for something important," my mother had said. "I can't think of anything more important than helping our daughter reclaim her life." The following morning, despite lingering fatigue from my treatment, I called George Harrington and told him I wanted to proceed with preparations for the auction. "You're sure?" he asked, hearing the determination in my voice. "Absolutely. Let's make this happen." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparations. During the day, I threw myself into my research at Harrington Biotech, finding that immersion in meaningful work was the best antidote to both the physical effects of chemotherapy and the anxiety about the upcoming auction. Evenings were devoted to auction strategy sessions with George, financial planning, and steps to secure the funds I would need. Through it all, I maintained radio silence with James, letting our lawyers handle the necessary communications about the divorce. My attorney reported that James had become increasingly frustrated with what he termed my unreasonable demands regarding the financial settlement. "He seems to think you should be grateful for what he's offering," my lawyer noted during one update call. "I've made it clear that your contributions to the marriage, both financial and otherwise, entitle you to a more equitable distribution." 1 week before the auction, the Victorian was officially listed, and as George had predicted, the Columbus real estate community buzzed with excitement. The property hadn't been available for purchase in over 20 years, and its prime location and architectural significance made it a coveted acquisition. That evening, my phone lit up with a text from James. "Just saw the Lakeview listing. Are you behind this somehow?" I stared at the message, surprised by his immediate assumption that I was involved. It revealed how thoroughly he'd underestimated me throughout our marriage that he now saw machinations where there were none. "Not everything is about me," I replied. "Sometimes houses just go up for sale." "It's going to auction," he texted back. That's Victor Harrington's doing. He knew I wanted that house. The persecution complex was so typical. James always believed any obstacle to his desires must be a deliberate attempt to thwart him, rather than simply the normal workings of a world that didn't revolve around him. "Perhaps you should take it up with the owners who are divorcing," I suggested. "I hear they can be difficult to reason with." He didn't respond further, but I could almost feel his suspicions simmering across the digital void. I set the phone aside, returning to my review of the auction procedures George had outlined. Whether James suspected my interest or not, I would be prepared. The day before the auction, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. Natalie Pierce stood in my doorway, looking distinctly uncomfortable in designer clothing that suddenly seemed ill-fitting, as if she'd lost weight recently. Her perfect blonde hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, her expression a careful mask of professional neutrality. "Dr. Chen," she began formally, "thank you for seeing me." "Ms. Pierce." I gestured to the chair across from my desk, curiosity overriding any desire to send her away. "What can I do for you?" She sat, her posture rigid, hands clasped tightly, in her lap. Up close, I could see the strain beneath her polished exterior, slight shadows under her eyes, a tension in her jaw that makeup couldn't quite disguise. "This is awkward," she started, then stopped, seeming to reconsider her approach. "I'm here about James." Of course she was. I kept my expression neutral, waiting for her to continue. "He's not been himself lately," she said carefully. "The auction tomorrow has him obsessed. He's hardly sleeping, hardly eating. Everything is focused on winning that house." I studied her, seeing beyond the woman who had replaced me to someone clearly struggling with her own set of disappointments. "And you've come to me because I think you're planning to bid," she said directly, abandoning pretense. "He's convinced Victor Harrington put you up to it, to sabotage him." I nearly laughed at the transparent projection. James always did have a talent for attributing his own tactics to others. Natalie didn't disagree, which I found telling. "The thing is," she continued, "this house means everything to him. His entire investment group is committed. His professional reputation is riding on this acquisition." "I'm aware of how James operates," I said evenly, "staking everything on symbols of success rather than substance." She flinched slightly, at that, perhaps recognizing herself in the assessment. "I just thought, if you are planning to bid, maybe you could reconsider." The audacity of the request momentarily stunned me. This woman, who had participated in the dismantling of my marriage, was now sitting in my office asking me to step aside for James's benefit. "Let me make sure I understand," I said carefully. "You'd like me to refrain from pursuing something I want so that James can have it instead?" She had the grace to look embarrassed. "When you put it that way, it sounds terrible." "Because it is terrible," I replied, not unkindly. "It's exactly the dynamic that defined my marriage. My desires always subordinate to his. I'm surprised you're not familiar with the pattern yet." Color flooded her cheeks, and I realized I'd hit closer to home than intended. "Things between us aren't," she began, then trailed off. "Aren't what you expected," I supplied. "Let me guess. He's critical, distant, impossible to please. Nothing you do is quite right, but he can't articulate exactly what he wants. He's charming in public but cold in private. He uses withdrawal of affection as punishment for perceived slights." With each point, her eyes widened slightly. "How? Did you know?" "Because I lived with him for 12 years, I said simply. "The problem isn't you, Natalie. It's never been you, just as it was never me. It's James." She was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this. "He said you were bitter, that you couldn't accept that he'd moved on." "What do you think?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perception. She studied me, her gaze more perceptive than I'd given her credit for. "I think you're exactly what he's afraid of. A woman who doesn't need his approval anymore." The insight surprised me, coming from someone I'd dismissed as merely young and impressionable. There was more to Natalie Pierce than I'd allowed myself to see. "Are you going to bid on the house?" she asked finally. "I haven't decided," I said, though we both knew it wasn't entirely true. "But if I do, it won't be to hurt James. It will be because I want it for myself." She nodded slowly, rising to leave. At the door, she paused. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry about how things happened, and about your cancer. He never told me you were sick when we started seeing each other." I believed her. James had likely compartmentalized, presenting himself as someone escaping an unfulfilling marriage rather than abandoning an ill wife. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "And Natalie? Whatever you decide about your relationship with James, remember that you deserve someone who celebrates your strengths rather than exploiting them." After she left, I sat at my desk, processing the unexpected encounter. The conversation had left me feeling strangely settled, as if I'd closed a chapter that had remained partially open. I no longer saw Natalie as the woman who had stolen my husband, but as someone caught in the same patterns that had trapped me for years. My phone buzzed with a message from George Harrington. Final strategy session tonight, 7 p.m. at my office. Auction registration complete. Tomorrow would be the auction. Whether I won the Victorian or not, I had already claimed something far more valuable: the right to pursue what I wanted without apology or explanation. The freedom to define success on my own terms. I gathered my research notes, preparing to leave for the day. Whatever happened at tomorrow's auction, I was ready. The morning of the auction dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through my bedroom windows as if the universe itself was offering encouragement. I'd slept surprisingly well, free from both the night sweats that sometimes accompanied my treatment and the anxiety I had expected to feel. Instead, I woke with a sense of calm determination that carried me through my morning routine. I chose my outfit carefully, a tailored charcoal pantsuit that conveyed both authority and understated elegance, paired with a silk scarf in deep teal that brought out the color in my eyes and complemented my newly growing hair. The post-chemo pixie cut had evolved into a chic, short style that made me look more sophisticated than I had with my former long locks. Cancer had taken things from me, but it had given me a new perspective on what really mattered. And it certainly hadn't taken my determination. George Harrington arrived at my house precisely at 9:15, his silver Mercedes gleaming in the driveway. He carried a leather portfolio containing all the documentation we would need for the auction: proof of funds, identification, bidding protocols. "Nervous?" he asked as I slid into the passenger seat. "Strangely, no," I replied, fastening my seatbelt. "Whatever happens today feels like a step forward, not a reaction." He nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the right mindset. Remember our strategy. Stay calm, bid confidently, and stick to your ceiling. Don't get caught up in the emotion of the moment." "I've spent too many years being driven by emotion," I said. "Today is about being strategic." The auction was being held at the Columbus Convention Center, a neutral location that would accommodate the significant interest the Victorian had generated. As we approached the building, I spotted a familiar BMW in the parking lot. James had arrived early. "Your ex-husband is already here," George observed, pulling into a space a discreet distance away. "I expected as much," I said, gathering my purse and the folder containing my bank verification documents. He's always been punctual for things that matter to him. Inside, the auction room was already filling with potential bidders, real estate, professionals, and curious onlookers. The Victorian on Lakeview Drive wasn't just any property. It was a local landmark, one of the few remaining original homes from Columbus's early development as a commercial center. Its sale was a noteworthy event in local real estate circles. George guided me to the registration desk, where I completed the necessary paperwork and received my bidding paddle, number 24. We found seats near the back of the room, giving us a clear view of both the auctioneer's podium and the other bidders. I scanned the room, identifying familiar faces from Columbus's business community. Several prominent developers were present, as well as representatives from a historical preservation society and what appeared to be private investors. And there, in the front row, sat James with 3 men I recognized as part of his business circle, the investment group he had assembled to ensure his victory. As if sensing my gaze, he turned, his eyes sweeping the room until they found mine. For a moment, he simply stared, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to something harder as understanding dawned. I held his gaze steadily, neither challenging nor retreating, until he turned back to confer urgently with his associates. "I think he just realized you're here to bid," George murmured beside me. "Apparently he didn't take Natalie's warning seriously," I replied. "Natalie? His girlfriend came to see you? George raised an eyebrow. Yesterday, she asked me not to bid on the house because it meant so much to James. George chuckled softly. And here you are anyway. Good for you. I'm not here to spite him, I clarified. I'm here because this house represents something important to me too. A dream I set aside because his dreams always took precedence. Before George could respond, a hush fell over the room as the auctioneer took his place at the podium. He was a distinguished older gentleman with a resonant voice that commanded attention without seeming overbearing. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, he began. Today, we're privileged to offer one of Columbus's architectural treasures, the Victorian estate at 427 Lakeview Drive. A large screen behind him displayed photographs of the property, the elegant facade with its wraparound porch, the meticulously maintained gardens, the spacious interior with original woodwork and updated amenities. Each image reinforced my desire to make this house my own, to transform it from James's status symbol into my sanctuary. We'll begin the bidding at $2 million, the auctioneer announced. Do I have an opening bid? A paddle raised. Immediately near the front, one of the developers making an initial play. The auctioneer acknowledged the bid and called for $2.2 million. Another paddle went up, then another. The early bidding moved quickly, establishing the serious contenders and eliminating the merely curious. James's group entered at $2.5 million, his associate raising their paddle with practiced nonchalance. I remained still, following George's advice to wait until the initial flurry subsided. By $3 million, several bidders had dropped out. By $3.5 million, only 4 serious contenders remained. James's group, a representative from the Historical Society, a developer I didn't recognize, and a woman in a crisp business suit who bid with quiet confidence. $3.8 million, the auctioneer called. Do I have $4 million? George glanced at me, a question in his eyes. I nodded once, and he raised our paddle for the first time. $4 million from paddle number 24, the auctioneer announced. The ripple of murmurs that swept through the room told me my entrance into the bidding had been noted. James turned sharply in his seat, eyes finding mine again, his jaw visibly tightening even from a distance. I kept my expression neutral, my focus on the auctioneer rather than on my ex-husband's reaction. The bidding continued, now at a more measured pace as the numbers climbed. The Historical Society dropped out at $4.2 million, followed by the unknown woman at $4.5, leaving only James's consortium and me. $4.5 million, the auctioneer confirmed. Do I have 4.7? George raised our paddle again, calm and deliberate. 4.7 million from paddle 24. Do I have 4.9? James conferred briefly with his associates before their paddle went up. 4.9 million from paddle 17. And so it continued, the increments now feeling weighty as we approached the ceiling George and I had established based on my available funds and the property's appraised value. 5.3 million from us. 5.5 from James. 5.7 from us. At 6 million, George leaned over to whisper in my ear, "We're approaching your limit. Are you comfortable continuing?" My limit was 6.2 million, every penny I could muster from my savings, the Harrington Biotech contract, and the loan my parents had arranged. Beyond that, I would be financially overextended in a way that would jeopardize my health and recovery. One more increment, I whispered back. Then we stop. He nodded, raising our paddle once more. 6 million from paddle 17, the auctioneer called. Do I have 6.2? 6.2 million, George called, raising our paddle for what we both knew would likely be the final time. James turned fully in his seat now, staring at me with open hostility. I met his gaze calmly, feeling none of the intimidation such looks had once inspired. He turned back, gesturing emphatically, to his associates, their heads bent together in urgent discussion. $6.2 million from Paddle 24, the auctioneer confirmed. Do I have 6.4? The room grew quiet, all eyes on James's group as they continued their hushed conference. Finally, the lead investor, a man I recognized as Tyler, Brennan, one of James's oldest business associates, raised their paddle. $6.4 million from Paddle 17. George looked at me, the question clear in his eyes. We were beyond my limit now. I shook my head slightly, accepting the reality with a surprising lack of disappointment. I had pushed to my maximum, had stood my ground, had made James fight for every increment. That itself was a victory of sorts. $6.4 million, the auctioneer repeated, going once. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the conclusion. Going twice. Suddenly, the convention center doors swung open, and a figure strode purposefully into the room. I recognized David Harrington immediately, his entrance causing a stir among the attendees. He made his way directly to where George and I sat, leaning down to whisper urgently in his brother's ear. George's eyebrows shot up, and he turned to me with barely contained excitement. "The board just approved an advance payment on your research patent," he whispered. "David rushed it through this morning when the latest trial results came in. It changes your financial position significantly." I stared at him, processing this unexpected development. How significantly? He wrote a number on the corner of his auction program and showed it to me. With this additional funding, my ceiling would increase by nearly $1 million. $6.4 million going for the third and final time, the auctioneer called, his gavel poised. $6.6 million, George called out clearly, raising our paddle once more. The room erupted in murmurs of surprise at this last-moment bid. James whipped around, his expression a mixture of disbelief and fury as his eyes darted between me and the Harrington brothers. $6.6 million from Paddle 24, the auctioneer acknowledged, his professional demeanor not quite concealing his own interest in this dramatic turn. Do I have 6.8? James and his investors engaged in another hasty conference, their body language betraying increasing tension. After a prolonged discussion, Tyler Brennan raised their paddle again. $6.8 million from Paddle 17. The bidding continued with renewed intensity. 6.8, 7, 7.2, 7.4. With each increment, the tension in the room mounted. I remained outwardly calm, though my heart raced with each exchange. This was no longer just about acquiring a house. It had become a public battle of wills between James and me, with the Victorian as both prize and symbol. At $7.8 million, Tyler Brennan hesitated for the first time, looking distinctly uncomfortable as he conferred with James. I could see James becoming increasingly agitated, gesturing emphatically while Tyler shook his head. $7.6 million from Paddle 24, the auctioneer called. Do I have 7.8? The silence stretched longer this time. Finally, Tyler Brennan looked directly at the auctioneer and shook his head. No more bids. James appeared to be arguing with his investors, his face flushed with anger, but they remained firm in their refusal to continue. 7.6 million, the auctioneer repeated. Going once, going twice. The crack of the gavel echoed through the suddenly silent room. Sold to paddle number 24 for $7.6 million. A collective exhale seemed to pass through the crowd, followed by a buzz of conversation as people processed what they had just witnessed. I sat perfectly still, the magnitude of what had just occurred washing over me in waves. I had done it. The Victorian on Lakeview Drive, the house that had symbolized success and status in James's eyes for so long, was now mine. George grasped my hand, squeezing it gently. Congratulations, Emma. You did it. David leaned forward from the row behind us. Perfect timing, I hope? The board was unanimous after seeing this morning's trial results. Your approach to targeted immunotherapy is revolutionary. Perfect timing indeed, I managed, my voice steadier than I would have expected given the adrenaline coursing through me. Thank you both for everything. As we stood to make our way to the settlement desk, I finally allowed myself to look directly at James. He remained seated, staring straight ahead, his investors having already begun to depart. The defeat was written in every line of his body, not just the loss of the house, but the public nature of that loss, witnessed by many of Columbus's business elite. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old impulse, the need to smooth things over, to minimize his discomfort, to make myself smaller to accommodate his wounded pride. I recognized it for what it was, the conditioning of years, and let it pass without action. As if sensing my gaze, James finally turned to look at me. In his expression, I saw anger, certainly, but beneath it something else, a grudging recognition, perhaps even respect. I had become someone he could no longer predict or control, someone who would pursue her own desires without apology. I nodded once in acknowledgement, then turned away to follow George to complete the purchase paperwork. My victory wasn't in James's defeat. It was in my own transformation from someone who had believed she needed his approval to someone who trusted her own judgment. The settlement process took nearly an hour, during which I signed countless documents, transferred the initial payment, and arranged for the final closing. By the time we emerged from the convention center, James was long gone, but word of the auction's dramatic conclusion had already spread throughout Columbus's social circles. My phone buzzed constantly with messages, from Rachel, from colleagues, at Harrington Biotech, even from acquaintances I hadn't heard from since James left. Everyone wanted details about the auction, about my unexpected triumph over one of Columbus's most prominent businessmen. I responded selectively, sharing the news with Rachel and my parents, but letting the other messages wait. This moment wasn't about public perception or social standing. It was about claiming something for myself after years of putting others first. "Would you like to see your new home?" George asked as we walked to his car. "The keys won't be officially transferred until closing, but I can arrange a private showing." The question caught me off guard. In all the preparation for the auction, I'd focused so intently on the process of acquiring the Victorian that I hadn't fully processed the reality of owning it. Yes, I decided. I would like that very much. 20 minutes later, we pulled into the circular driveway of the Victorian on Lakeview Drive. Seeing it now, knowing it would soon be mine, I felt a surge of emotions, pride, certainly, but also a sense of rightness, of coming full circle in an unexpected way. The listing agent met us at the front door, congratulating me on my successful bid before leading us inside. The house was even more impressive than the photographs had suggested. Soaring ceilings, intricate woodwork, spacious rooms filled with light from tall windows. Yet despite its grandeur, it felt welcoming, almost familiar, as if it had been waiting for me. As we toured the main floor, I found myself mentally rearranging furniture, envisioning color schemes, planning renovations that would honor the home's historical character while making it distinctly mine. The formal dining room would be perfect for hosting dinner parties for my research colleagues. The library could become my home office, its built-in shelves ideal for my medical texts and research journals. The previous owners updated the kitchen and bathrooms, the agent explained as we continued through the house, but they were careful to preserve the historical elements wherever possible. In the kitchen, sleek modern appliances coexisted harmoniously with original architectural details. A perfect metaphor, I thought, for the balance I was finding in my own life between honoring my past and embracing new possibilities. When we reached the third floor, the agent opened a door to reveal a large, sun-filled room with windows on 3 sides. This was originally the nursery, but the previous owners used it as an artist's studio. The light is exceptional. I stepped into the space, immediately struck by its peaceful atmosphere and the sweeping views of the garden below. "This would make a perfect home laboratory," I said, almost to myself. "For preliminary research work." George nodded. "I was thinking the same thing. The ventilation is already excellent, and it would be simple to add the necessary infrastructure." We concluded the tour at the guest house, a charming 2-bedroom cottage situated at the back of the property near the gardens. As I stood on its small porch looking back at the main house, a vision began to form in my mind, not just of a private residence, but of something more purposeful. "What are you thinking?" George asked, noticing my thoughtful expression. "I'm thinking this is too much house for just me," I said slowly, "but maybe that's not a bad thing." On the drive back to my current home, I shared the idea that had begun taking shape during the tour, to use the Victorian not just as a personal residence, but as a sanctuary for women rebuilding their lives. After significant setbacks, the guest house could house a researcher or medical professional going through career transitions. The third-floor laboratory could support independent scientific work. The gardens could provide both beauty and therapeutic benefits. "A place where women can recover and rediscover themselves," I explained. "Whether from health crises, professional setbacks, or personal losses." George listened thoughtfully. "That sounds remarkably aligned with what you've been through yourself." "Sometimes our greatest challenges show us our true purpose," I said. "Cancer took things from me, and so did James's betrayal. But they also gave me clarity about what matters, and an understanding of what others might need when facing similar challenges." As we pulled into my driveway, George handed me a folder containing copies of all the auction documentation. "Congratulations again, Emma. Not just on the house, but on everything you've accomplished these past few months. It's been remarkable to witness." I thanked him and made my way inside, the events of the day finally catching up with me as fatigue settled into my bones. Cancer treatment had taught me to respect my body's limits, to rest when needed without seeing it as weakness. I made a cup of tea and settled onto my sofa, allowing myself to fully process what had transpired. The Victorian was mine. Against significant odds and James's determined opposition, I had acquired the property that had symbolized success for so long in our marriage. But now it represented something different. Not status or social climbing, but possibility and purpose. Not the culmination of ambition, but the foundation for something meaningful. My phone rang. James, finally calling after hours of silence. I considered letting it go to voicemail, then decided to answer. Whatever he had to say, I could hear it without being diminished by it. "Hello, James." "You had no right," he began without preamble, his voice tight with controlled anger. "That house was my dream, and you knew it. You did this to punish me." "I did this because I wanted the house," I replied calmly. "My reasons are my own, just as yours always were." "Don't pretend this isn't about revenge," he scoffed. "You outbid me to humiliate me in front of my investors, in front of the entire business community." "Actually, I outbid you because I have plans for that property that don't involve using it as a status symbol," I said. "But I understand why you might see it that way. You always did attribute your own motivations to others." His breath hissed through the phone. "The Harringtons put you up to this. They orchestrated this whole thing to undermine me." "The Harringtons recognized my worth as a researcher and compensated me accordingly," I corrected him. "Something you never managed to do as a husband. They saw value where you saw only accommodation." The silence that followed told me my words had hit their mark. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted from accusation to something almost plaintive. "What are you going to do with it? You can't possibly need a house that size." "I'm going to fill it with purpose," I said simply, "which is something you might want to consider for your own life, James. Status symbols don't fill the emptiness inside." Another silence, longer this time. "You really have changed," he finally said, echoing his words from our last conversation, but this time without the anger, just a quiet recognition. Yes, I agreed. That's what growth looks like. After we hung up, I sat in the gathering twilight, feeling an unexpected sense of peace. The conversation with James had brought no recriminations, no defensiveness, no need to explain or justify myself. I had spoken my truth calmly and directly, neither attacking nor apologizing. That, perhaps even more than winning the Victorian, marked how far I had come from a woman who had carefully modulated every word to avoid upsetting her husband to someone who could stand firmly in her own convictions without needing his approval or understanding. Tomorrow would bring closing arrangements, treatment planning, research developments, the ongoing work of rebuilding a life after profound disruption. But tonight, I allowed myself to simply be present with the knowledge that I had reclaimed not just a house, but my own agency. Not just property, but possibility. As darkness fell outside my windows, I realized I was smiling. Not from triumph over James, but from the quiet joy of recognizing myself again after so many years of careful self-erasure. Cancer had threatened. My life and James had abandoned me when I most needed support. Yet here I was, stronger and more authentic than I had been in years. The Victorian on Lakeview Drive would be my home, yes. But the real homecoming had already happened, the return to myself. 6 months after the auction, I stood on the wraparound porch of the Victorian, watching as the first golden rays of sunrise illuminated the gardens. The autumn air carried a crisp chill, prompting me to wrap my cashmere cardigan more tightly around my shoulders as I sipped my morning tea. The property looked different now, transformed by careful renovations, thoughtful landscaping, and the unmistakable energy of purpose that permeated the space. My final chemotherapy treatment had been 3 months ago. The oncologist's words still echoed in my mind from my last appointment. Complete remission. The cancer is responding beautifully to treatment. While I would need regular monitoring, for years to come, the immediate threat had receded, allowing me to focus fully on building the future I had envisioned. The Victorian had become both my home and the headquarters for what I now called the Phoenix Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting women rebuilding their lives after personal or professional crises. The name had come to me during those first weeks of renovation, watching the house shed its status as James's unfulfilled ambition and emerge as something with genuine meaning. The guest house now housed our first resident scholar, Dr. May Lin, a brilliant immunologist who had lost her university position after taking extended leave to care for her dying mother. She was using the third-floor laboratory to conduct independent research while applying for new positions, her work already yielding promising results in the same field as my own studies at Harrington Biotech. Inside the main house, the formal parlor had been transformed into a meeting space where we hosted weekly support groups for women navigating various transitions, health crises, career changes, relationship endings. The library contained carefully curated resources on everything from medical research to financial planning to emotional resilience. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Don't forget dinner tonight, 7 p.m. Bringing that prosecutor I told you about, the one who specializes in medical fraud cases. Wear something that shows off those new curves." I smiled, typing back a quick confirmation. My body had changed yet again as I recovered from treatment. Stronger now, curves returning where cancer had temporarily claimed them. My short hair, grown into a stylish bob that framed my face in a way my previous long style never had. More importantly, I carried myself differently, shoulders back, head high, gaze direct. The physical transformation merely reflected the more profound changes within. Finishing my tea, I headed inside to prepare for the day ahead. The Victorian's interior bore little resemblance to the austere modernism James had favored in our shared home. Here, warm colors complemented the original woodwork. Comfortable furniture invited actual use rather than mere admiration, and personal touches Family photographs, treasured books, meaningful artwork created a sense of authentic inhabitation. My home office, once the Victorians' library, reflected both my scientific background and my emerging role as the Foundation's director. Medical journals shared shelf space with books on nonprofit management and women's leadership. My research awards stood alongside thank you notes from women the Foundation had already helped. I settled at my desk to review the day's schedule. First, a conference call with David Harrington about our joint research initiative. Then lunch with a potential donor. Afternoon appointments with 2 new women seeking the Foundation's support. Finally, the dinner with Rachel and her friend. As I opened my laptop, an email notification appeared. From James. Despite my initial impulse to ignore it, I clicked it open, curious rather than apprehensive about what he might want after nearly 2 months of silence. Emma, I'm reaching out because the Pharmaceutical Association has asked me to chair their annual gala committee, and I've learned your research is being considered for their Innovation Award this year. I wanted to assure you that my presence won't create any awkwardness should you choose to attend. Our divorce is finalized, and I've accepted your decision regarding the Victorian. I hope your health continues to improve. Regards, James. The message was so typically James, formal, self-centered, offering the appearance of courtesy while subtly reminding me of his continued importance in our professional community. A year ago, I would have immediately begun worrying about the potential intersection of our social circles, might have even considered declining the award nomination to avoid conflict. Now, I simply forwarded the email to my assistant with a note. Please confirm my attendance at the pharmaceutical gala next month. I'll need updated information on the Innovation Award nomination process. Then I closed the email and turned my attention to the research proposal I was developing with David, a far more valuable use of my energy than dwelling on James's carefully worded posturing. The morning conference call with David went exceptionally well. Our immunotherapy approach had shown remarkable results in early clinical trials, with my own case serving as one of the success stories. The research that had begun as my professional comeback was now revolutionizing treatment protocols for certain aggressive cancers. The FDA is fast-tracking our approval process, David explained, the excitement evident in his voice even through the phone line. Your targeted approach to immune activation is changing how we think about cancer treatment entirely. Our approach, I corrected him gently. This has been a team effort from the beginning. A team you built and led, he countered. Don't minimize your contributions, Emma. False modesty doesn't suit the woman who outbid James Mitchell for the Victorian and, full view of Columbus's business elite. I laughed, still slightly amazed at how completely I had shed the habit of downplaying my accomplishments. Point taken. When do we move to expanded trials? We spent the next hour discussing technical details, potential research grants, and publication strategies. By the time we ended the call, we had a clear path forward for the next phase of development, one that would potentially help thousands of patients facing diagnoses similar to mine. My lunch meeting took place at Riverside Bistro, the same restaurant where Vanessa Miller had spotted James with Natalie so many months ago. I had deliberately chosen it, part of my ongoing practice of reclaiming spaces and experiences rather than avoiding them because of painful associations. The potential donor was Catherine Jameson, a wealthy widow whose husband had died of the same type of cancer I had battled. She arrived precisely on time, elegant in a simple navy suit that spoke of old money and refined taste. Dr. Chen, she greeted me, her handshake firm. Thank you for meeting with me. I've heard remarkable things about your foundation. Please call me Emma, I replied, guiding her to our table. And I'm grateful for your interest in our work. Over lunch, I explained the Phoenix Foundation's mission to provide women facing significant life transitions with the resources, community, and space needed to rebuild effectively. Catherine listened attentively, asking astute questions about our operational model, funding structure, and long-term goals. So you live on the property? she asked as we finished our main course. I do, I confirmed. The Victorian has plenty of space, and having me on site provides stability for our resident scholars and support group participants. She nodded thoughtfully. And the medical research component? How does that integrate with the emotional support aspects? They're complementary, I explained. My own experience taught me that healing is holistic. Physical recovery, emotional processing, and intellectual engagement all happen simultaneously. Our residents are navigating all of those dimensions at once. Like you did, she observed, shrewdly, when your husband left during your cancer treatment. News traveled fast in Columbus. I neither confirmed nor denied her statement, simply saying, personal experience certainly informed our approach. By the end of lunch, Catherine had committed to a substantial donation and expressed interest in joining our advisory board. As we parted ways outside the restaurant, she clasped my hand warmly. What you're building matters, Emma, not just the cancer research, though that's certainly important, but this model of women supporting women through crisis. It's something I wish had existed when I was trying to find my footing after Henry died. It's not too late, I told her. Our support groups include women of all ages. Your perspective would be valuable. She promised to consider it, and, as I watched her walk to her car, I felt that particular satisfaction that comes from connecting someone with exactly what they need, even when they didn't realize they were looking for it. The afternoon brought 2 intake interviews with women seeking the foundation's support. The first was a former corporate attorney, recently diagnosed with MS, and struggling to reimagine her career around her changing physical capabilities. The second was a researcher whose work had been credited to her male supervisor, leaving her questioning her place in academia. I listened to their stories, recognizing in each the same fundamental questions I had faced. Who am I without the identities I've lost? What remains when external definitions fall away? Where do I find the strength to begin again? By the time I prepared for dinner with Rachel, I felt the familiar mixture of exhaustion and fulfillment that characterized my days now. The bone-deep tiredness of meaningful work rather than the hollow fatigue of maintaining appearances that had defined my years with James. I chose a deep burgundy dress that accentuated my newly restored curves, paired with simple gold jewelry that had been a gift from my parents when I completed treatment. The woman in the mirror looked back at me with clear eyes and a confident expression, someone who had walked through fire and emerged not just intact, but illuminated. Rachel arrived promptly at 7, accompanied by a tall, distinguished man with intelligent eyes and an easy smile. Emma, this is Michael Donovan. Mike, the incredible Emma Chen I've been telling you about. Michael's handshake was warm and direct. Rachel's descriptions didn't do you justice. It's a pleasure to finally meet the woman who's revolutionizing both cancer treatment and women's support systems simultaneously. I laughed, gesturing them inside. Rachel tends toward hyperbole when describing her friends. Come in, let me give you the tour before dinner. As we moved through the Victorian, I watched Michael taking in not just the architectural details, but the purposeful way the space had been arranged. The community rooms, the library resources, the gardens designed for both beauty and healing. This is remarkable, he said as we completed the tour. You've created something that addresses the whole person, not just single aspects of recovery. That was the intent, I acknowledged. Crisis doesn't happen in neat categories. Neither should healing. Over dinner, served in the Victorian's elegant dining room, conversation flowed easily. Michael spoke about his work prosecuting pharmaceutical companies that falsified research data, his passion for justice evident in every anecdote. Rachel shared updates about her legal practice, which had increasingly focused on supporting women through career transitions. As we finished the main course, Rachel excused herself to make a phone call, leaving Michael and me momentarily alone. He studied me with those perceptive eyes, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "So," he said casually, "are you going to ask me about the coincidence of Rachel introducing us? Or shall we pretend this isn't a very transparent setup?" I laughed, appreciating his directness. I was wondering when one of us would acknowledge it. Rachel isn't known for her subtlety. "Would it help if I told you I requested the introduction?" he asked, surprising me. "I heard you speak at the medical ethics conference last month. Your perspective on patient advocacy was compelling. I wanted to meet the mind behind those ideas." "Now I'm intrigued," I admitted. "Most people who approach me these days are interested in either the research breakthroughs or the dramatic auction story." "Both impressive accomplishments," he acknowledged. "But it was your philosophy that caught my attention. The idea that healing requires reclaiming personal agency after systems fail us. It resonates with my work in ways I didn't expect." When Rachel returned, the conversation shifted to lighter topics, but I found myself increasingly drawn to Michael's thoughtful perspectives and genuine questions. Unlike James, who had always steered conversations toward himself, Michael seemed genuinely interested in understanding others' viewpoints. As the evening concluded and they prepared to leave, Michael asked quietly, "Would you be open to continuing our conversation? Perhaps dinner, just the two of us?" 6 months ago, I might have hesitated, unsure if I was ready to consider any kind of romantic involvement after the wreckage of my marriage. But the woman I had become recognized the value of connection without fear, of exploring possibilities without guaranteeing outcomes. "I'd like that," I said simply, and we exchanged numbers before they departed. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, my phone rang with an unexpected call. My oncologist, Dr. Sharma, calling well outside office hours. "Emma, I'm sorry to disturb you so late," she began, her voice unusually animated. "But I've just finished reviewing your latest test, results alongside the data from our research trials, and I had to call immediately." "Is something wrong?" I asked, immediately alert. "Quite the opposite," she replied. "The combination of your targeted immunotherapy protocol and the treatment regimen we designed has produced remarkable results. Your markers are better than remission levels. They show complete restoration of normal immune function, and the same pattern is emerging in other trial participants." My heart raced as I absorbed her words. "You're saying the approach works consistently? In cases with your specific genetic markers, yes. We're seeing unprecedented success rates." Dr. Sharma's voice held the controlled excitement of a scientist on the verge of breakthrough. "Your research hypothesis was correct, Emma. The targeted activation protocol is proving far more effective than standard approaches." We spoke for nearly an hour, analyzing implications and next steps. By the time we ended the call, the outlines of a groundbreaking paper were taking shape, one that would potentially change treatment protocols for thousands of patients. Sleep eluded me after such momentous news. I made my way downstairs to the Victorian's expansive kitchen, brewing tea and taking it out to the porch where I had started my day. The night was clear, stars visible above the trees that surrounded the property, the autumn air now carrying a deeper chill. As I sat in the peaceful darkness, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. 13 months ago, I had received 2 life-altering pieces of news in quick succession: a cancer diagnosis and my husband's betrayal. Either alone would have been devastating. Together, they had seemed insurmountable. Yet, here I sat, in a home I had claimed for myself, my health restored, my career flourishing, my life filled with purpose and meaningful connections. The path had not been easy. There had been days of debilitating treatment side effects, nights of questioning whether I had the strength to continue, moments of rage at the unfairness of it all. But each challenge had stripped away another layer of the careful accommodations I had built around myself during my marriage, revealing the core of resilience and clarity that had always existed beneath. Cancer had threatened my life, but in doing so, It had taught me to actually live it. On my terms, according to my values, in pursuit of what truly mattered. My phone buzzed with a text message from Michael, sending a simple thank you for the evening and suggesting several dates for dinner the following week. I smiled, typing back a response that accepted his invitation without either eagerness or hesitation, the balanced response of a woman who knew her own worth. As I finished my tea, another message arrived, this one from Dr. Mei Lin in the guest house. Lights still on in main house. Everything okay? Important news from lab if you're awake. I invited her to join me on the porch, and minutes later, she appeared, excitement evident in her usually composed features. I've identified the mechanism, she announced without preamble, settling into the chair beside mine. The reason your immune activation protocol works so effectively in certain genetic profiles, but not others. It's a specific receptor variant. That she broke off, suddenly self-conscious. I'm sorry. It's the middle of the night. This could have waited until morning. Never apologize for scientific excitement, I told her with a smile. It's one of life's purest pleasures. For the next hour, we discussed her findings, sketching diagrams on napkins and planning further experiments to confirm her hypothesis. If she was right, and her methodology certainly seemed sound, we had identified a key factor that would allow much more precise targeting of immunotherapy treatments. This could be the publication that gets you back into a top research position, I noted as we concluded our impromptu session. May shook her head slightly. I'm not sure I want to return to traditional academia. What we're building here, this combination of research freedom and social purpose, it's unlike anything I've experienced before. I'm thinking of applying for a grant to expand our work through the foundation. Her words warmed me deeply. The vision I had conceived during those first days of owning the Victorian was taking root, growing beyond my initial hopes into something with the potential for lasting impact. I'd support that entirely, I assured her. Let's talk about grant strategies tomorrow. After May returned to the guest house, I remained on the porch a while longer, savoring the quiet night and the growing sense of rightness that permeated my life. I was scheduled to speak at a medical conference the following month, the same event where James would be chairing the gala committee and where my research might receive the Innovation Award. A year ago, the prospect of such a public intersection with my ex-husband would have filled me with anxiety. Now, I found I could contemplate it with equanimity. James was simply a person from my past, someone whose choices had ultimately catalyzed my growth, though that had never been his intention. I wondered briefly how he was faring. Rumor had it that things with Natalie had ended shortly after the auction, though he had been seen recently with another young woman at various corporate events. The pattern was so predictable it almost inspired pity. The endless pursuit of external validation, the belief that the next acquisition, the next relationship, the next status symbol would finally fill the emptiness within. The thought carried no bitterness now, only a kind of distant compassion. James was still trapped in the cycle we had both perpetuated during our marriage, the relentless chase for more without ever questioning why it never seemed enough. I had escaped that cycle, but only after the twin catalysts of cancer and abandonment had forced me to confront what truly mattered. 3 weeks later, I stood at the podium of the Columbus Medical Center's Grand Ballroom, accepting the Innovation Award for our breakthrough immunotherapy approach. The audience, comprised of medical researchers, pharmaceutical executives, and healthcare professionals, responded with enthusiastic applause. This recognition belongs to an entire team, I said, holding the Crystal Award. To David and Victor Harrington, who provided the platform for this research. To Dr. Mei Lin, whose insights into receptor mechanisms were crucial to our success. To the brave patients in our clinical trials who trusted our approach when conventional methods had failed them. I paused, scanning the audience briefly. James sat at a prominent table near the front, his expression carefully neutral as our eyes momentarily met. And finally, I continued, I want to acknowledge that breakthroughs often emerge from unexpected sources. My own cancer diagnosis last year became the catalyst for this research direction. Sometimes our greatest challenges contain the seeds of our most meaningful contributions. At the reception following the ceremony, I circulated among colleagues and potential research partners, discussing implications of our findings and possibilities for expanded trials. I was deep in conversation with the director of a major cancer center when a familiar voice spoke behind me. "Congratulations, Emma. The award is well-deserved." I turned to find James standing there, perfectly groomed in an expensive suit, a practiced smile in place. Beside him stood a young woman I didn't recognize, blonde, conventionally attractive, watching our interaction with barely concealed curiosity. "Thank you, James," I replied easily. "The research team has worked incredibly hard." "I've been following your progress," he said, "both professionally and with the foundation. What you've accomplished with the Victorian is unexpected." I smiled, hearing the veiled reference to his former dreams for the property. Sometimes spaces find their true purpose when we listen to them rather than imposing our expectations. He nodded slightly, absorbing the gentle rebuke. "You're looking well. The treatments were successful, I take it?" "Complete remission," I confirmed. "Though my case is just one data point, the broader trial results are what matter for advancing the protocol." An awkward silence fell. The young woman beside him shifted uncomfortably, clearly wondering why she hadn't been introduced. I extended my hand to her. "I'm Emma Chen." "Stephanie Barrett," she replied, her handshake tentative. "I'm with Meridian Pharmaceuticals Marketing Department." Another assistant, I noted, though I kept my expression neutral. "It's nice to meet you, Stephanie. Are you enjoying the gala?" Before she could respond, a warm voice joined our circle. "Sorry I'm late. The surgery ran longer than expected." Michael moved to my side, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back as he extended his other hand to James. "Michael Donovan, I don't believe we've met." James's composure flickered momentarily as he absorbed this new development. "James Mitchell. Emma and I were married." "Were being the operative word," Michael replied pleasantly. He turned to Stephanie with a genuine smile. "Michael Donovan. I prosecute pharmaceutical fraud cases for the state attorney's office." Stephanie's eyes widened slightly, and I suppressed a smile at Michael's deliberate mention of his profession to someone from a pharmaceutical company. "Emma, David Harrington is looking for you," Michael continued smoothly. "Something about a research center proposal he wants to discuss." Grateful for the graceful exit, I excused myself from James and Stephanie, walking with Michael toward where David stood across the room. "There is no urgent research center proposal, is there?" I asked quietly. "Not that I'm aware of," Michael admitted with a small smile. "But you looked like you could use an extraction." Was that uncomfortable? Seeing him again? I considered the question seriously. Not uncomfortable, exactly. More like anticlimactic. He seems so much smaller now, somehow. "Not smaller," Michael corrected gently. "You've just grown to your full height." The insight resonated deeply. I had indeed grown, not in opposition to James or in response to his abandonment, but into the fullness of my own potential that had always existed, waiting to be claimed. As the evening progressed, I found myself observing James occasionally from across the room. The practiced charm, the careful positioning among influential figures, the subtle ways he kept Stephanie slightly secondary to his own presence. Patterns I had once been too close to see now seemed glaringly obvious from a distance. Later, as Michael and I prepared to leave, James approached once more, this time alone. "Emma, could I have a moment?" he asked, his expression more genuine than it had been earlier. I nodded, stepping slightly away from the departing guests with him. "I wanted to say," he began, then paused, seeming to struggle with the words. What you've built, with the research and the foundation, it's remarkable, truly. I don't think I ever saw that potential in you when we were together." The statement contained both a compliment and an unwitting confession of his fundamental failure as a partner. I simply nodded, accepting both aspects without comment. "Maybe that's why things unfolded as they did," he continued, his tone reflective. "You needed to break free to become this." "Perhaps," I acknowledged. "Or perhaps this was always who I was, beneath the accommodations I made to fit into the life you wanted." He absorbed this, nodding slowly. "Either way, I'm glad you're thriving, Emma, despite everything." "Thank you," I said, recognizing the sincerity in his words. "I wish you well too, James. I hope you find what you're looking for." As Michael and I drove back to the Victorian, the autumn night wrapped around us like a comfortable blanket, familiar stars visible through the car windows. He reached across to take my hand, his touch warm and grounding. "You were magnificent tonight," he said simply. "Not just the award or the speech, but how you navigated everything. The recognition, the connection with colleagues, even the interaction with your ex-husband. There was such grace in all of it." "Grace comes easier when you're standing on solid ground," I replied, squeezing his hand gently. When we arrived at the Victorian, lights glowed warmly from several windows. The guest house where May lived, the main house where 2 additional residents had recently moved in. More than a home now, it had become a sanctuary for women reclaiming their lives, a center for research that might save countless patients, and the physical embodiment of my own transformation. In the driveway, Michael turned to me before we exited the car. "I'm falling in love with you, Emma Chen," he said quietly. "I thought you should know that. 6 months ago, such a declaration might have sent me retreating behind protective walls. Now, I simply met his gaze openly. I'm beginning to feel the same way," I told him honestly. "And I'm not afraid of that anymore." Later that night, after Michael had gone and the house had settled into silence, I stood at my bedroom window looking out at the property that had once represented James's ultimate status symbol and now served as the foundation for something far more meaningful. In the moonlight, I could make out the shapes of the gardens we had designed for healing. The guest house where breakthrough research was underway, the gazebo where support groups gathered on pleasant days. My reflection in the window glass showed a woman transformed, not just by the physical journey through cancer treatment, but by the profound reclamation of self that had followed James's abandonment. The painful catalysts that had initiated this metamorphosis no longer defined me. They had simply revealed what had always existed beneath the carefully constructed facade of Mrs. James Mitchell. Dr. Emma Chen, researcher, foundation director, cancer survivor mentor, stood firmly in her own power, neither diminished by past losses nor defined by them. The woman in the reflection smiled back at me, her eyes clear with purpose, her future unfolding according to her own vision rather than someone else's expectations. Life would continue to bring challenges, certainly. Cancer could recur. Relationships, even promising ones like the connection with Michael, might not fulfill their early potential. Research breakthroughs could hit unexpected obstacles. The foundation might face funding difficulties or organizational growing pains. But whatever came, I would face it as myself, whole, centered, clear-eyed about what truly mattered. The journey through illness and betrayal had stripped away everything extraneous, leaving only the essential core of who I was meant to be. As I turned from the window to prepare for sleep, a text message illuminated my phone. A final test result. From Dr. Sharma confirming what we had hoped. The immunotherapy protocol was showing sustained effectiveness across multiple patient profiles. I smiled, setting the phone aside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to build something meaningful from the foundation of hard-won wisdom. The woman who had once shaped herself to fit a man's expectations now shaped institutions, research protocols, and support systems to help others find their own way forward. cancer had threatened to take my life. James had walked away when I needed him most. But in losing what I thought I couldn't live without, I had found something infinitely more precious: myself, whole and complete, capable of creating a life of authentic purpose. The Victorian on Lakeview Drive stood as testament to that transformation. No longer a trophy to be acquired, but a sanctuary where broken lives could heal, where new possibilities could take root, where women could rediscover themselves after crisis just as I had done. In the end, that was the most powerful response to abandonment, not anger or vengeance or bitter triumph, but the creation of something beautiful and meaningful from the very ashes of loss. Phoenix rising, indeed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.